Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Today, we have two guests on today. The first is that we're going to be talking with him in just a moment. He's the candidate for State Auditor, Timothy Lamb. You may recognize him. He was the Democrats' candidate for Attorney General last cycle. This time around, he's running against incumbent Republican Josh Gallion, who I should add is going to be on the show Friday. So we're going to have both candidates on. Josh will be on Friday. Then later in this show, we're going to have on Don Morgan. He is the president of the Bank of North Dakota. Hasn't been there very long, recently appointed. But the Bank of North Dakota sent out a press release recently talking about some misinformation, some reporting, some things that are going on, people making claims about the Bank of North Dakota, and not just the Bank of North Dakota, but they're kind of running wild on the internet. So I invited President Morgan on to talk about some of that, and hopefully we'll put some facts into that space. So we'll be talking to him in the second part of the show, but for now, we're going to be talking to our guest, Timothy Lamb. Tim, how are you?
Great, Rob. Well, pleasure to be here.
Tell us why, here we are. We're less than a week away from Election Day, and why? What's your case to voters? Why should they choose you and not stick with the incumbent?
Well, the issues that are on the ballot is whether voters want to have transparency or not. My opponent's at 8 years to show transparency, and I think voters are the ones that I've talked to, that I've gone around the state and talked to, basically don't know what's going on, and specifically what's going on with the legacy fund. And there's just, I think, an element that's missing here, and that's what I'm going to provide. I'm going to have an annual report that's accessible to the public. I'm going to go around to regional venues to explain the particular audits that are going on in the communities and in all the political subdivisions, communities, cities, counties, fire departments, ambulance services, all the agencies that are audited. I'll make myself available to explain those audits in common sense terminology. And if there's issues, we'll address them. If they're looking good, we want to give that show that the communities are doing good. And my opponent has had a reputation of grandstanding on some things that in my experience of 15 years on the school board and being on the audit committee, are pretty, sort of standard that have happened. We have principals, for example, in the school district, they all, they have a little stash or whatever of funds that they use for birthday parties and paying for kids' lunches and stuff. But my opponent made a big deal about that. And so, out in the fire department, and I just think, if you understand these subdivisions, they're all sort of, they're all sort of struggling, and they need help. They don't need criticism made public, and that's what I'll provide that that contrast of leadership style and that difference in transparency and accountability for our state government.
Tim, you mentioned the legacy fund, and that's something that we've talked about several times on this show around transparency. Can you help listeners and help me understand sort of what the role of the auditor is in creating transparency in the legacy fund? I don't believe the auditor sits on the state investment board or anything like that. So what would the auditor's role be in transparency around the legacy fund?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chad. I read Jake, Troy Jackson's column yesterday in the Bismarck Tribune, and he makes the argument that the legacy fund should be transferred under its own independent review board, and instead of being under the I think Senate Investment Board. So as the auditor, first of all, I looked at the audits that were promulgated in the last couple of years. I don't see the investment board as one of the entities that are audited. It's a very complicated, entity, the legacy fund. And if you even look at their statements, their financial statements, good luck in trying to figure them out. I mean, you cannot understand where all that $11 billion is and where it's been invested and what's going on with it. So I think the role of the auditor in this situation, if the legislature, I'm obviously going to work with the legislature and the governor on this, is to provide sort of a common sense review and explanation of the legacy fund. We're talking, just think about it. It's $11 billion strong, which is, I think that's commendable, especially when you consider, our oil industry is not going to last forever. And it's there to, sort of compensate for that, the vacancy, if you will, of that oil production when it comes. And the other countries have done it. Norway has done it. Some other states have done it. Alaska's done it. So it's a commendable enterprise, and it has value. But $11 billion is, $11,000 million. And going around to different communities, especially like a community like Jamestown, they're hurting. They need infrastructure. They need housing. They need assistance. And we shouldn't be a state that's state wealthy and community poor. That's what I think an audit would show, that that we can do better than what we're doing. And even if we use, I don't know about using the legacy fund to buy the Minnesota Twins, but keeping it local, I think, is kind of the idea here. And there's a lot of entities that that the state could consider. I mean, look at what we have now. We have the state mill. We have the state, the Bank of North Dakota. We have our own, the North Dakota Insurance Reserve. I mean, there's insurance reserve fund that it supports the communities as far as insurance. So we have a lot of independent things that are going on in our state. That's what we ought to foster.
Let me, and by the way, in my defense of my my tongue-in-cheek column about North Dakota buying the Twins, Major League Baseball teams, pretty good investment. They pay off, especially when they're collecting luxury tax from the Yankees and the Twins.
I think
Yankees and the Dodgers, not Yankees.
Yankees and the Dodgers. Yankees and the Dodgers. Not the Twins.
Talk about the Dodgers.
I misspoke. I misspoke.
A good franchise. No, I think there's merit in that.
Well,
Rob, because look, you're getting an industry and taxing it. This is like a double whammy there.
It has surprised me how many people have taken that column more seriously than I did. But let me ask you this, Tim, because one criticism, I mean, some of the things you're talking about where, the auditor's office really went after the Gwinner Volunteer Fire Department. They really went after the Killdeer ambulance service. I reported, those are my stories. I reported them,
right.
And I was critical of the auditor for sensationalizing what I perceived as aggrandizing himself, and in some instances, maybe kind of trying to time the audits politically. And so I think that's a real danger for auditors where they can overstep their role. I think the auditor's role is so important. I'm glad I think we elect too many statewide officials. The auditor is one I'm glad we elect because I think it should be independent and it should only be reportable to the voters. That being said, I think there is a temptation in the auditor to sensationalize findings and also to exceed the bounds of the auditor. So some of the things you were talking about, what we should or shouldn't use the legacy fund, when I hear you say that, I'm a little worried because I think our current auditor has a problem with maybe exceeding his bounds. Do you think that would be exceeding your bounds? I mean, to me, I feel like the auditor's job is to audit, make sure the laws are followed, flag problems, put it in a report, release it to the public, and then you leave it up to the policymakers to react to it. That's my perception of the auditor. Am I wrong? Do you have a different philosophy?
Well, I don't know what's about a philosophy, Rob. I think if you look at, North Dakota Census Code, Chapter 5410, it spells out what the auditor is supposed to be doing. Now, I'm not trying to overstep my bounds in getting into the legacy fund. I'd obviously want to work with the legislature, work with the governor's office, and set out some boundaries as to what to audit with the legacy fund. But I do think it's a state entity. It falls within the purview of the auditor's office to do, if nothing else, if not an external audit, have an internal audit of the functions of that of that entity. Really, it's a very unique entity. So I think that's the way it should be treated. And I agree. The auditor's office should be nonpartisan. I've had the pleasure and the honor of being endorsed by the Fargo Forum, the Grand Forks Herald, and the Jamestown Sun. And that endorsement, those endorsements, I don't take lightly. I really. Were
you surprised? I mean, normally, that's my company, obviously, and although I'm not involved in the endorsement process at all, were you surprised to receive that endorsement?
Well, frankly, I would be. I wouldn't be totally honest if I wasn't surprised. I think, as you know, the history of the forum is kind of like the last few election cycles. We trying to get through the big red wall in this state and have people take a look at the individual candidates and make their choices that way, as opposed to taking their and going right down one column in the ballot. Basically, that's what has been occurring in the media, in my opinion. I'm not saying they're complicit or there's some kind of conspiracy here. I'm not making that insinuation at all. What I am saying is that it's been pretty difficult for candidates on my side of the ballot to get any exposure in the media, and getting the Ford and the Herald and the Sun's endorsement was, I guess, in your words, surprising, but also I think I've earned it. If you think about how they rationalized or reasoned their choice, I do believe that they made the right choice based on the reasoning that they made. It wasn't done by a bias or favoritism toward one party or the other. It was done by looking at, what the candidates have done and what we promised to do. And I'm bringing a new look to the auditor's office. My opponent's had 8 years, and he has not performed to the standards. In fact, the legislature, as you know, you reported, Rob, that the legislature mandated this auditor to do an internal performance audit. What does that mean? That means that they question how he's doing business. They're not questioning his numbers. It's not audit. It's not an accounting type of audit. It's a performance audit. And that means, when I was in the military, we had what they call IG inspections. Inspector General would come into your unit and look at all the performance of all your functions. Are you performing your mission? How's your personnel doing? Your maintenance, your supply? All those areas were checked. And that's the first thing I'd want to have done if I'm elected. I'd like to have that performance audit done to take a look at how we're doing business within the auditor's office and whether, we're performing our mission adequately. So when you talk about the parameters of the auditor's office, Rob, I do agree with you. There are certain, parameters I think we need to stick to them.
Tim, I want to ask you a political question. I mean, you brought up those endorsements and that they had good reason because of what Josh has done and what you would do differently. I think there's no doubt that Auditor Gallion has frustrated some legislators in sort of traditional Republicans and obviously Democrats as well. But I got to be honest, I'm not exactly sure that I understand and that I've seen a campaign that has educated the public on where you stand. I mean, we're not seeing money raised. We're not seeing advertisement. We're seeing lots of action around the state from Trygve Hammer and Katrina Christensen. So can you just talk a little bit, like, what have you done to actually try to win this race?
Well, I guess the first thing is I was asked to run, Chad. And, it's an honor to run for office. And, I've raised as much, funds as I think I can. I've kept within my budget constraints as far as getting the message out. But, I tongue in cheek, I tell folks that the auditor's office is right above dog catcher on the ballot. I don't know how much attention you can give to the office. My opponent, from what I gather, has spent nothing on advertising. I'm advertising.
I want to. If you look at the incumbent's disclosure report, he's raised almost all of his money from two sources. He had, I think it was like 15 to 17,000, or maybe it was 15 to 20,000, I forget. But one donation from Kelly Armstrong's leadership PAC and one donation from Kevin Kramer's leadership PAC, and that's pretty much it. So the incumbent hasn't done a whole lot of fundraising or I guess I can't speak to campaigning, but not a lot in that report.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I got some of those type of dollars, but I would, like Chad, I would put out a more robust campaign, if you will. We're going to be advertising this weekend, if you will, in the Forum, in the Herald, in the Bismarck Tribune, and I think Minot is doing doing an election type, will blurb in the Minot paper. So I think, and I've done an interview with KX, the KX News. I've submitted to any interview that's been required. I've gotten around, I think, all the venues in the state, and my opponents are not opponents. I said my colleagues that you mentioned for the Senate and the Congress. I mean, they have $1 million campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no comparison. I mean, they're running federal campaigns. A lot of their money is coming in from out of state, but that's great. Kudos to them. They're doing a great job, and they can afford to travel around the state and do all these things. That's great. But for this particular office of auditor, I think I've done the best job I can to really show the difference between me and my opponent and what I will bring to the office and what he hasn't really done. And whether that gets exposed to the voter and they act to try to be informed about the issues, I don't know. And as far as the winner and those issues, those, they weren't just complaints. They went to the legislature, and the legislature had a hearing. They investigated it, and they found that, hey, we need to have a performance audit. And look, it's the first time in history that there's ever been a performance audit on the auditor's office. First time ever. So, that should raise some red flags, and I think it did with the Fargo Forum, and that's why I got their endorsement.
Well, Tim, I thank you for coming on and talking about your campaign.
Hey, well, thanks, Rob. Thanks a lot, Chad. I appreciate your questions, and again, I appreciate the support and the vote of your audience. And look, I've gotten a number of emails and comments on my Facebook page that they're Republicans, the ones that are informed, understand what's going on, and they're going to vote for me. They said, look, we know what your opponent has done. We know what you could do, and we're voting for you. And so, obviously, if I'm going to get elected, I'm going to need a fair share of predominantly traditional Republicans to come over to my side and say, hey, look, Lamb is a pretty good candidate. Let's give him a shot at being auditor and good. And we're a one-party state in effect. The auditor's office will bring some checks and balances to accountability and to transparency in our state government. And I appreciate everybody's support. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for your time, Tim.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Welcome back. Just finished up our interview with Tim Lamb, who's running for auditor. Now we're going to turn to something that you may have seen on the internet. And this is kind of the world that we're living in now, where things that are plausible, and I think that this is somebody who works in the news media, and by the way, it's somebody who once upon a time was a blogger, and by the way, who actually, I have had dinner with Jim Hoft, who founded Gateway Pundit. I met him at a conference years and years ago. But this is the way things work now, is something's on the internet, the zone gets flooded with a lot of plausible seeming information, and suddenly that information begins to take on a life of its own, and people start to think, because maybe they can't quite wrap their arms around it, or they don't have the time or the capacity to check and validate whether the information is correct, but they also don't just want to dismiss it because if it's true, it's obviously hugely problematic. And I think this is the way this stuff works, is it's unscrupulous people who play on the fact that the public is busy and the fact that the public doesn't have a lot of time and the fact that in some ways, in some places, in some instances, the government has earned our distrust. And then they exploit that. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Bank of North Dakota. There was recently a headline from the Gateway Pundit, which, by the way, I should add that the Gateway Pundit has recently settled a lawsuit and declared bankruptcy over their lies about the 2020 election. This is not a credible outlet. But they had a headline, and it's gotten a lot of traction, and it's been promoted in some venues in the state of North Dakota. The headline is, Public Reports Suggest Bank of North Dakota Corruptly Protecting State's Political Class with Hundreds of Millions in Sketchy Loans and Concealed Losses. It goes on. It names a lot of anonymous sources and everything else. It does mention one state lawmaker, Ken Weston, in it. He's a Republican lawmaker from District 9. Yeah, District 9, right, Chad? I got that right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, District 9. But we're just going to run through some of these. We have on Don Morgan. He's the president of the Bank of North Dakota. The Bank of North Dakota sent out a press release about this, and so I've responded to the press release saying, why don't you come on? We'll talk about this. Don, welcome. Thanks for being on.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Let's talk about this. First of all, react to that headline for us.
Yeah, unfortunately, like you mentioned, we live in an age of snippets and and half truths that can get some traction, especially in the digital space, social media space. Typically when something like this comes out, we'll watch it and we won't respond because otherwise we might give legs to something that's really so factually misrepresented or just in total error. But unfortunately, we watched this article and it kind of got picked up by some local influencers, some local politicians, and kind of put out there with tacit approval. So we ultimately felt it was time to respond with just the facts of the situation. And the facts are this. We've got a 105-year mission. We've been a trusted agency for 105 years. We are that today. Banking is one of the most highly regulated industries that exists. It's also the most transparent. You can go pull a call report on any bank. Financial statement audits, oversight by the Department of Financial Institutions, oversight by the Industrial Commission, the legislature. So it's kind of laughable on the whole, you're not overseen. And then, it's very clear. You can look at our audited statements. In its simplest form, we take about $7 billion in deposits from the state. We invest them back into the state, into farms, ranches, businesses, individuals. And then we spend almost all of our time making sure those loans get paid back. And we do that by partnering with the 70, 75, community banks and credit unions in the state to get that money out to the state, to really invest back into the state. That's who we are. Incredibly overseen. We're not writing off $500 million a year in bad loans. We write off like $3 million a year in bad loans, and that's on a $6 billion loan portfolio. So it's very clean, very conservative, and we're just, we're all about our mission.
Don, thanks for coming on to chat about this. I found the article referring to here sort of hard to read when you consider how many quotes and assumptions are made by, quote, critics or anonymous bankers or anonymous sources, those kind of things. So it is sort of hard to read because there is so much innuendo in this thing, not backed up by facts. So the first thing, and you sort of alluded to this a little bit, the article says that the Bank of North Dakota does not have to follow federal regulations, rules, and laws. The bank is able to loan out billions with little to no oversight. Can you talk about what oversight the Bank of North Dakota has with maybe a little more specificity in terms of the Industrial Commission, that kind of thing?
Yeah, thanks. The Industrial Commission is our primary board. It's made up of the governor, the attorney general, and the ag commissioner. That was set in place, I think like in 1919. That's been the overseeing board. We meet with them monthly. We go through the financials, credit quality metrics. We actually take.
By the way, that one of those meetings just happened yesterday at the Industrial Commission. I don't know if the video is available. It'll be on YouTube eventually if you want to watch it.
Yes, absolutely. We go there. We take certain size loan requests to them for approval. And we also have an advisory board made up of 9 bankers throughout the state and other business professionals that also provides oversight. We work with the legislature every 2 years and in the intervening months between the legislative sessions on running their specially directed programs, and they also provide oversight. We've got a financial statement audit done each year by Eide Bailey. And then we are examined every 18 months by the Department of Financial Institutions. We receive the same safety and soundness exam that all of your community banks receive in the state, either on an annual or every 18-month cycle. So, and our last one came back clean, super strong.
So one of the quotes attributed to an anonymous, it's in quotation marks, but I have no idea who they're quoting because it's not mentioned in the article. But what it says is what appears to be going on here is that the bank is quietly supporting a large portfolio of bad investments. One banking executive said BND is buying bad loans off their books to keep them solvent. This raises a question as to the quality of the loans at BND, which politicians keep opaque. Whereas state entities with deposits should be getting a normal return in this market, they are likely getting negative returns through write-downs, even though the bank is claiming it is turning a profit. Potentially, the bank loses several $100 million a year if it maintained the depositors' funds like any other financial institution. This situation continues because people are too afraid to speak up. Address that.
Wow, it's hard to know where to start.
Let's start about the profit, because we hear, routinely, and I see it in the line items where the Bank of North Dakota announces a profit. By the way, that profit shows up in the state's budgets because it's a state-owned bank. So it's real money in the accounting. It gets spent, it gets used in various ways. To speak to that, where's that money coming from if it's not a profit? I guess it's got to be a profit, right?
It is. We're reporting, you can call it $150 to $200 million profit per year. That's out in our financial statements. But what a lot of people don't understand is, banks earn interest income from the loans that we do and the securities we buy, and that's where most of that income comes from. We then pay interest expense on deposits. Well, our depositors is the state of North Dakota, so we pay interest expense also, and that, 150, 200 million profit is after we pay that interest expense. So the simplest way to look at this, the total return the bank returns is, we return, call it 200 million in net income to the state, but we also pay about 200 million in interest expense to the state on their deposits as our depositors. So we really return about 400 million every year on 10 billion. That's a 4% return. And that's a good, and what we like to say is risk balanced return, because our job first and foremost is to manage risk on behalf of the state. Liquidity risk, interest rate risk, credit risk, repayment risk, you name it. That's our primary job. And then once we manage that risk, we then invest back into the state of North Dakota via our programs and via partnering with all the banks and credit unions out there. And then we provide that return after we've gone through that mission stack. And that's about 4% per year that we feel is a nice, comfortable, risk-balanced return.
So the article also references the bank writes down approximately $475 million in bad loans, and that if we were better invested, the bank profits could reduce people's property taxes by 1/3. Can you talk a little bit about what the actual writing down of bad loans is at the Bank of North Dakota compared to what is claimed in this article?
Yeah, the data is since 2015, our average write-downs per year were 3.3 million. So you could sum that up over 10 years. That's 33 million in total. So a far cry from 450. Also,
let's be specific, because I think one of the challenges here is that yes, a lot of this information is available in public. Sometimes the public doesn't understand, what does writing it down mean? Is that just somebody couldn't pay their loan and you had to just write it off? That's what that means?
Yeah, so it means somebody couldn't pay their loan. It could be a farmer struggling. It could be a commercial real estate project struggling. It could be a mom and pop business struggling. It could be a host of things. It reaches a point where then we're working on them on a repayment plan, and we may reach a point where, hey, we just don't feel good about the collectability of it, so we're going to, quote unquote, charge it off, and we report that charge off as a loan loss. That doesn't mean we don't continue to go after it. We do. And that's where you enter the realm of possibly getting confessions of judgment or foreclosure or whatnot. We like to exhaust every opportunity for our North Dakota farm ranch businesses and individuals before we get to that point. And so that's the process we go through. And we also, I'd add, we compare to the North Dakota banking industry as a whole every time we report to our overseeing bodies. There's great peer data out there, and our data compared to the peers on all of our credit quality metrics continues to show we run cleaner even than the North Dakota industry. And if you look at the North Dakota banking industry compared to national, you can go compare those metrics. The North Dakota banking industry runs cleaner than the national banks out there outside the state. So is we're very clean, we're very conservative. And another thing we benefit from is almost all of our investment goes back into the state of North Dakota. And culturally, the state is full of great people that pay their bills. I mean, that's a great thing. We're the hardest working state. We're also a state that pays our bills. That helps contribute to our low loss rates, and another good reason to continue to invest back into the state of North Dakota. And if I could address the property tax, because we also manage $1 billion in specially legislatively directed programs. The biggest ones are the School Construction Revolving Loan Fund, the Infrastructure Revolving Loan Fund's another one, the Water Infrastructure Revolving Loan Fund. Now, what do those do? They set aside funds from the legislature that we manage, and they put out funds that are available to school districts, to municipalities building sewer, water, roads in their areas, and it offers it to them at a 2% interest rate. So that is a way that the legislature via BND has been putting out property tax relief, is saving that interest expense as those schools get built. I think on the School Construction Revolving Loan Fund, it's been a savings of $137 million total out of that program since it was initiated to school districts, which then they benefit from, so they can, lower their property tax burden.
And that's one fundamental difference between the Bank of North Dakota and, say, a private institution. A private institution wants to profit and maybe has incentive to maximize profits. The Bank of North Dakota serves the taxpayer, so sometimes we do something that's not about profit per se, but that's about saving the taxpayers money. In this instance, the taxpayers of a school district need to build a new building or a new facility, and so basically the Bank of North Dakota is used to finance it. We save ourselves some money because we're doing it ourselves. I mean, that's not the way a traditional bank operates, but it is the way, and which I think speaks to my next question. The Bank of North Dakota is something of a unicorn, in that this is not a government-owned bank. Is pretty unusual in America. One of the claims made in the article is currently Bank of North Dakota, I'm quoting here, currently Bank of North Dakota is exempt from public disclosure requirements that other governmental bodies operate under. Can you address that?
Yeah, to my knowledge, we're not. I don't know if there's some nuances with some specific agencies, possibly where there are some slight differences. There could be. But in general, we are subject to the same oversight rules, similar oversight rules, and transparency rules. For example, our financial statement audit, our reporting up to the legislature, all the elected representatives, reporting to the Industrial Commission. The only thing we don't do that's different from kind of the North Dakota banking industry in terms of how banks report, which are very transparent, we don't file a call report. That would be the one difference because we don't offer FDIC insurance.
What's a call report?
Thank you. So every bank in the nation that is subject to FDIC insurance or offers FDIC insurance, they file a quarterly call report. You can go out to fdic.gov and you can search up any bank in the nation and you could get the call report data and see what everything from their asset size to their net income to their credit quality metrics to their allowance for loan loss to you name it. It's incredibly transparent reporting. That's a call report. It's financial data filed with the FDIC on a quarterly basis and made public. We're not subject to that because we're state-owned. We're backed by the state. We don't offer FDIC insurance on deposits because we don't offer deposits to the residents. We take the deposits on behalf of the state that come in as revenues. So we're not subject to that reporting, but we report then via our financial statement audits, our reporting to the state. So it's incredibly transparent.
One of the claims, it says in 2023, the bank's auditor issued an adverse opinion stating that the bank fails to adhere to U.S. generally accepted accounting principles.
So this is nuanced. So we get a financial statement audit every year. We're on a 3-year rotation with Eide Bailey. We are a governmental agency. This is part of being a unicorn. We are a governmental agency. So governmental agencies per accounting codification should follow GASB, right? We choose to follow FASB, financial accounting standards, like other banks, because we're this mix of we're a government agency, but we're run like a bank. And we run it like a bank so that we can benefit from all the things that running a bank appropriately benefits the owners from. So that's the only, and the auditors, the accountants, they have to classify that because that is a true fact. But it's a it's a nuanced accounting methodology and infrastructure that we follow because we're a unicorn. But it does not mean that we do not report accurate financial information, because if you read on and you can go read this on our website, you can pull up our annual report, our annual audited financial statements, you can read Eide Bailey's management letter. It goes on to state that via FASB, the way we're reporting, our financial position is reported accurately in all material respects.
So Don, the only person who I can see in this article who actually goes on record is Senator Weston. So I sort of have, the question of, have you talked to Senator Weston? Has he reached out to the bank to ask for clarifications on these things? And then also, one of the quotes he talks about is that the idea that our state entities would save $9.5 billion over 20 years if they move their deposits out of the Bank of North Dakota raises some questions. So what has your interaction been with Weston, and what do you think of this claim that he's essentially saying we could cut 5% from our annual budgets at the state if we weren't investing money in the Bank of North Dakota?
The first part of that, I've had no interactions with Senator Weston around this article. He hasn't reached out. I haven't reached out to him. I did see he was quoted in there. I haven't had any interactions with him other than that. The second part is, I got to give a little bit longer answer here. So they're misquoting a cash management study done by RVK that was presented at the Budget and Finance Committee of the legislature, I believe in September. And that study came in with an idea. And it said the idea is, if we take all the deposits from the bank and essentially do away with the bank and put them over here in an investment account that is stratified, some in cash, some in midterm bonds, but some, a big chunk, in long-term stock, international equities, so on and so forth, we think the state could make more money and add it up over time. That study self-admittedly stopped short of saying, here's the new risk profile you would have to take in order to generate that higher return. And by the way, that return over that many years, it assumes some things like the legislature will never pull any money out of it. It'll just sit there and compound forever. So it's misquoting a study done that really, there's many more questions to be answered about that study. And then there's a huge question around, what's the risk profile? It's back to our mission. And you mentioned it, Rob, earlier on. Our mission isn't return for return's sake. We don't take the state's deposits and then go take as much risk as we can to make as much money as we can. That's not our job on behalf of the North Dakota citizens. Our job is to take it, manage the risk, be a source of liquidity, invest it back into the state of North Dakota via lending and specially legislatively directed programs, and then we generate a return. And we feel we're generating a nice risk-balanced return of about 3.75 to 4% per year, all in.
I perceive the report that you're talking about is part of a larger policy debate that I think is perfectly healthy for our state, where we're talking about how best to use the Bank of North Dakota. And there's a valid debate to have over it. And we're not going to have that debate on this show today, because that's not what that's about. But I feel like they are like the focus on that report was attempting to take a side of that debate and make it sound sinister. I mean, nobody's accusing the Bank of North Dakota currently of doing something wrong. We're just saying, are there changes we could make in our strategy or our philosophy or our policy towards the bank that could produce some better outcomes? And like with any policy debates, there's pros and cons to it. So
absolutely,
that's what it is. Another thing it was saying is that there are almost, and again, quoting from this piece, there's almost $2.5 billion in loans that are rated at best as, quote, and they're saying that they're quoting the bank's 2023 annual report. They're saying, quote, exhibiting the earliest signs of potential problems with, quote, unproven or, quote, somewhat erratic cash flow. Is that true, or can you give us context to that?
No, it's again, I don't know specifically where they might have found that. It's just simply not the facts. Now, we, like every bank, we have, performing loans, and then we've got loans we're watching. We call them a watch list. And then we got loans that are, in some version of a workout agreement, or we're working with them on a new repayment schedule or something. But that total run rate on our kind of loans that we're watching or whatnot more runs about like 30 million to 40 million year over year, kind of all in, maybe 50 million. But that doesn't mean those are losses. That means that there's something that has occurred in that credit that has caused us to watch it more closely in order to ensure repayment going forward. So I'm not sure where that $2 billion number came from. We have a $6 billion loan portfolio. About $4 billion of it is to businesses in North Dakota, commercial real estate projects in North Dakota. $1 billion is to farmers and ranchers in North Dakota. $1 billion is in student loans, and about $400 million is on primary residences. And like every other bank in the state, we underwrite each one specifically to repayment sources. And I mean, we've got 170 staff that spend their time full-time, making sure that that portfolio is clean, of high quality, and is repaying as it should.
Don,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, one last thing. I went through and highlighted this article and just wanted to fact check some of it. One source says Bank of North Dakota has been in troubled financial straits before and was bailed out with nearly $1 billion in federal ARPA money in 2021. What do you say to that?
Again, a twisting of the truth. There was $1 billion in ARPA, but that was the federal government putting that out for COVID release to every state in the nation. Our state chose to, take it under advisement via the legislature and put it into some programs which we're administering and getting back to or putting into North Dakota via the legislator's directive. We have never received a bailout in 105 years. We haven't needed a bailout in 105 years. And we don't expect to need a bailout in the foreseeable future. So it's just a twisting of a fact for an agenda or something else going on, but it's just patently false.
I think that's one thing to keep in mind as people consider this information is that because the Bank of North Dakota is so unique in North Dakota, our state government uses it in ways. And so therefore, if we get federal money, it might flow through the state of North Dakota in a way that's unlike other states because we have an institution like the Bank of North Dakota. So we get something like ARPA money, the American, what was it? The American Rescue something Act.
I was gonna say it too, but I couldn't figure out what the P was in ARPA.
I can't ever remember what these acronyms are.
American Rescue Program of America.
I want to know how many
that's it.
It's not.
I want to know how many. I don't want to know how many tax dollars the federal government pays in coming up with acronyms. By the way, they have to have they have to have like an AI or something doing this stuff. Anyway, ARPA money. If the state of North Dakota gets ARPA money, our legislators might say, okay, well, it makes sense for us to route this through the bank, and the bank will administer some programs or what have you. Obviously, I'm being very generalizing here a great deal, but that's why it might look unusual to an outsider. In the same way that I always see these national articles talking about registered voters in North Dakota, because they forget we're the only state in the union that doesn't do voter registration. So the way you're talking about us is just, I know it looks weird from the outside looking in, but North Dakota just does things differently sometimes. So, but I mean, I think it's really important to stress, never received a bailout, don't currently need a bailout, don't foresee a need for bailout at any time in the future.
Correct.
So Don, my final question for you is, why did you decide that, and you sort of alluded to this earlier, but decide to respond to this article? Obviously we could have just started out the article starting about the interview by saying, is there anything in this article that's true? And we might have been done in about 5 minutes. But so why did you decide to come out and talk about this and sort of go, like, honestly, there's very little that's honest reporting in this article. Why did you decide that this was important that you came out and sort of called this out?
Well, I think the only part of the article is true. They got our name right. So I will give them that. The rest I would just say is twisted or just not factual or misrepresented or misunderstood. Like I said, we watched it and we said, just given that assessment on our behalf, we were just like, it's not worthy of responding. Let's just go do our mission, go about our good work, stay above the fray. But as it kind of got picked up by some more locals, it got some traction on social media. We said, hey, it's probably time to get some facts out there. And let the North Dakota citizens make up their own mind on what they believe. And what we wanted to get out there was, hey, we're trusted, we're transparent, we're willing to open it up. You can go to our website, view our reports, you can view the videos. You can go out and view videos or join the Industrial Commission meeting. It's open to the public. So are our executive meetings, our investment committee meetings. All of our meetings are subject to the open and closed laws within Century Code. So I mean, we're about as transparent as you could be, and we just wanted to share that to, just get get the other side of the argument out there on here's actually some facts.
Well, Don, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about it. And I feel like we ran through most of the big claims. But let me tell you this as somebody who uses North Dakota's open meeting and open records laws all the time. If there's something here where you still don't feel like you have an answer, if you still have a question or you're doubting or you have some trepidation about something, watch some of these meetings. They're all archived. You can get the audio recordings. The Industrial Commission, like I said, they're on YouTube. You can watch them. You can get the agendas. You can request emails. You can do all that. You can also talk to your lawmakers. If you talk to your local lawmaker, ask them questions. See if they can help you answer any lingering questions you have, because most of them are very, very responsive. North Dakota, and listen, I make a living writing about problems in North Dakota government. I'm not saying they don't exist, but what I'm saying is North Dakota is a very open place. Most of the people who work in government are good, upstanding people. And if you have questions or if you have doubts, don't let them fester. So, do the work to verify what you're reading independently. It's maybe not as hard as you think it is. Anyway.
Rob, can I add one other thing to that?
Sure.
And if you're a state lawmaker, maybe talk to the Bank of North Dakota before you talk to a national online blog about concerns you have about a state agency. I think we can solve a lot of problems by just asking questions and getting clarification without things running rampant on social media. And I personally expect our elected leaders to be better than just complaining on social media about something at the state.
I will tell you, I get a lot of interesting tips all the time about things that when they land in my inbox, boy, they seem like I could win a Pulitzer Prize for this. And then I ask some questions or I make some records requests, and then it turns out it's not nearly as exciting as it seems. That happens a lot. Anyway, Don, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure to join you.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
All right, just going to wrap up. We did 2 interviews there. Tim Lamb, who's running for auditor, and then the Bank of North Dakota interview. Lamb, what do you think, Chad?
I think that there are issues that the current auditor has in office, and it would have been nice if his opponent, Tim Lamb, would have been articulating those issues over the last 6 months or 9 months on what the issues are here.
All due respect to Tim Lamb, and I understand he was asked to run. Democrats have struggled with candidate recruitment. There is a base level of respect. I have people who are willing to at least give it a go. I get it. I kind of think the Democrats wish they had put on the ballot somebody capable of running a little more aggressive campaign against Gallion. And I say that as, Gallion, I think, needs to work for it a little more. There are some big question marks around his performance in office. And by the way, he's going to be on the show on Friday, so we'll ask him about some of that stuff.
I reported you on Friday, but I mean, it's unfortunate this isn't a competitive race where some of these issues that we've been hearing about over the last 4 years with Auditor Gallion haven't been discussed in the public and will not be at top of mind for voters when they vote in November.
I thought the most interesting question, you asked it during the...
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that.
I give you a lot of credit. You do an excellent job as an interviewer. I thought the best question was, why did the Bank of North Dakota send out that press release? Because I didn't cold call them for this interview. They sent out a press release. They were concerned about this. And I think they have the same dilemma that I sometimes have, which is, how much attention do I give a story? Am I elevating something that's nonsense? Am I being helpful to the public discourse? Because on one hand, I don't want to sit on important information. That's not my job. I'm not doing anybody good. But on the other hand, I don't want to elevate stuff that's just salacious or that's not helpful. So I think they kind of had that same dilemma. At what point do we do an official response to this? And I feel like they made the right decision because, listen, we live in a world where Alex Jones convinced 1 million people that the Sandy Hook school shooting didn't happen.
Right. Yeah. And I will tell you, reading that story, to me, it's just so painful. Anonymous sources, critics, and somehow connecting it to Stenjum emails and Holmberg's sex trafficking and like trying to connect all these dots that don't connect at all. And frankly, the Bank of North Dakota is just trying to do their job. They're turning profits for the state. They're helping people get low interest loans to keep your property taxes down. I mean, part of me just wanted to say, like, I don't know that they shouldn't have to deal with this crap is what frustrates me.
Yeah.
I actually, after the interview, I agree with you. It was good that they sent out the press release. I don't know that I agreed with it going into the interview, but I think you're right. But it's just unfortunate we have to deal with this stuff because it's so much innuendo and not fact.
Yeah. Although I understand the catch-22 you're in. On one hand, if you don't respond to it, you leave a vacuum, and they can fill the vacuum with more and more of this innuendo and everything else. On the other hand, if you respond, they just anybody who counters them, whether it's the president of the Bank of North Dakota, whether it's a plucky podcast host and his sidekick.
It was such a Batman and Robin sort of feel to that.
I know.
Podcaster.
But no matter what, like, they're going to expand the conspiracy and say, well, of course the bank, he's under political pressure, or he's been bought off, or they'll expand it to us. Like, they're just part of the cover-up. So, I mean that's how these conspiracy theories become like cockroaches, where you just can't get rid of them because anybody who rebuts it is just, well, you just expand the conspiracy and they're a part of it.
Yeah, I think Bank President Morgan handled that interview tremendously well. It was very much just the facts. Here's the claim. He delivered the facts of why the claims are inaccurate or misinterpreting what's going on. He didn't get into the reasons for it. I teed him up to take a shot at Weston. He didn't take that pitch. I think he handled that exceptionally well. Get the facts out there and move on and do your job.
Exactly. I thought that was fantastic. One thing I will say is the danger in doing what they did is that there's kind of like in a criminal justice system, the burden of proof is on the prosecution, right? The defense doesn't have to prove anything.
Right.
Their job, if anything, is to disprove what's going on. And I think that works in this realm. I wrote about it recently. It's called Hitchens' razor, and it's that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And that which doesn't, claims that are made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And I think that's something we really need to keep in mind. It's not on the Bank of North Dakota to necessarily have to go through and disprove all this stuff. If you want to claim that the Bank of North Dakota needed bailouts or that they're hiding all these bad loans and everything else, prove it.
Yeah.
Prove it.
And also, again, the article insinuates because John Oban was the Bank of North Dakota president 20 years ago and that he's in the banking industry, that
his family owns First Western Bank, which is based here in Minot. They're a banking family.
There are no North Dakotans that I know of that isn't aware of John Oban's families in the banking industry. There's also very few North Dakotans that I know who don't kind of like John Oban, right? And so the suggestion in these articles that somehow he's doing something untoward, and it doesn't say he's doing something wrong, it just points out, all these terrible things are happening. Oh, by the way, your U.S. Senator used to be the president of Bank of North Dakota. Oh, by the way, he, his family's in banking, and then just sort of leaves it alone.
It was kind of that odd, like you're reading along about all these claims about the Bank of North Dakota, and then you get like 3 paragraphs about
Ray Holmberg,
and it's like, well, what does that have to do with anything? And it's just Lupe is just trying to create a sinister context to what's going on. So, I mean, unfortunately, this is the world we live in now, where it's hard to know what to do with stuff like this because it does get traction. And then people who know better, who should know better, start sharing it because maybe, and that's part of what happens with this stuff too, is if it lines up with something that you already want to believe, that the North Dakota government is corrupt, or that, Republicans are bad, or whatever it is you want to believe. And because this maybe lines up with that and it works and maybe it serves your ends, and then you promote it, I mean, that's not okay.
And I would just say, this doesn't say that none of those things are true, right? I mean, this doesn't say that isn't some corruption, there isn't some, but this article certainly doesn't prove anything.
Clearly there are problems at state government. I just wrote a column chronicling all of the problems that we've had, the moral problems, the ethical problems, the criminal problems that we have had in leadership in the state of North Dakota. I am 100% willing to blow the lid off people doing wrong things, whether it's in political campaigns or it's in state government. I will stand by my track record. I don't care if it's Republicans or Democrats. I will do it. And I'm telling you, I'm looking at this, and I don't see anything. I don't see any there. I see a lot of innuendo and a lot of things where either the person fundamentally doesn't understand the information that they're looking at, or they're purposely mischaracterizing it.
Yeah. I mean, the Holmberg stuff, obviously a huge deal. He's going to jail now, which I think most people agree that's a good thing.
If we have room in the jails, by the way, which is my calling out today.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. But the Stenja missing emails, a big deal. But again, you can't just connect those two things to any other thing that you think might be bad in government and say, look, this helps prove the case that the Bank of North Dakota is dropping the ball here.
That is, I think, one of the most dangerous attitudes in America. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit before, or I've talked about it on a previous show, is this cynical attitude where they're all the same. They're all the same. They're all corrupt. Because what I think that does is that enables more of the same. Because if you just accept, well, they're all the same, it's like it's fatalistic. You're just accepting a sort of a certain level of whatever you want to call it, corruption or misdeed or what have you. You're just accepting it. And the thing is it's not true. It's not true. And that cynical attitude, it's what enables stuff like this.
But it's why it's important that, people of the same party or people of the same caucus sort of call out the behavior, right? It's like it's not acceptable because it makes me look bad as somebody who is also a Republican state senator or whatever. And so, but we also live in a time where there's so much tribalism that it's hard to call out somebody who's on your team.
Because the first thing they'll say is, well, what about Democrats?
Like, what aboutism? Yeah. Your column where it listed all the different things. I mean, I saw comments on Facebook, but what about this? What about this?
Okay. Yeah, that was one of the first comments. Like, yeah, now do Democrats. Well, what do you want me to do? I will.
But I can't just make stuff up.
Also, let's ignore. Let's be cognizant of the context here, which is that Republicans hold every statewide office in massive majorities in the legislature. There aren't that many Democrats in elected office right now, and the ones that are don't have the track record that Republicans do right now over the past 10 years.
There's not that many Democrats to screw up right now. So
yeah, trust me, if Democrats get into power, we'll have some of the same stories because unfortunately, this sort of thing is a certain amount of it is normal in politics, and neither side has a monopoly on the high ground.
And listeners cannot see the enthusiasm you have about the idea of more of this. I mean, I also, when I read your list of all the things, it's like, this is nice that Rob just has this built-in column that he just needs to add a couple things to the bottom of it. You can just,
read every 6 months, just run it again. Yeah. Add the latest stuff. The problem I run into with that is word count.
Here's the deal. You didn't start at the beginning, right? I mean, it's just so, the most recent ones.
It is what it is. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. As I said, we have Josh Gallion coming up on Friday, and I'm assuming we're probably going to want to do some election predictions there on that show. Friday.
Oh, man, I better get my stuff together before Friday then.
Better. And people are going to be very disappointed because you're going to hear a lot of, we don't know, particularly at the national level.
Yeah. So, no, Rob, I think we just pretend like we know.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't want to do that. If I don't know, I'm going to tell you I don't know. So we're gonna be doing that on Friday. And then coming up, we'll have our regular shows. Friday next week, Kelly Armstrong's going to be on. Maybe an early prediction. I have a feeling he's going to be governor-elect Kelly Armstrong by that point, but we'll see. Also on Tuesday after, we're going to have Pat Finken on, longtime political advisor, who, by the way, announced on Wednesday after the election, he'll be on. By the way, Pat announcing his retirement from North Dakota politics, which is a interesting thing.
Chad Oban is emotionally torn on this announcement because it's just in the last few cycles that I found some common ground with Mr. Finken on things we agree on. And now all of a sudden he's leaving the arena. But good for him. He should.
We'll talk with him more about that on Wednesday. And then the other thing I wanted to get to is we're actually the week after the election. I'm going on vacation. Chad couldn't do the shows. And so we're actually going to have guest hosts on. Corey Mock, who has been a guest co-host before, he's going to be hosting the show, and along with him will be former state senator Jessica Bell. So they'll be sitting in for us that week after the election, Wednesday, Friday. They'll be sitting in for us, and then after that, we'll get back to business again.
So, Rob, do we see a scenario where I can be the primary host when you're gone and have a different co-host?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Well,
it just so happened that this time around we're both gone, but in the future.
Oh, I cannot wait. I'm going to just load it up with liberal propaganda.
Yeah, is that what you? Okay, well, we'll see what that does for listenership. I don't know. Maybe it'll be great. Okay, thank you so much for listening. If you're still listening at this point, God bless you. You have.
And Rob, one more time
Yeah.
for the people in the back. Go Dodgers.
Yeah, the Yankees pulled one out last night. I was happy. we were not swept.
You're going to celebrate one win in the World Series. What happened? What happened to the Yankees where you're celebrating one win?
Don't ask. I don't know. You're not wrong. That hurt. That one hurt a little bit. I'm going to end the show now because I'm smarting.
Go cry.
That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Send me an email at rport@forumcom.com. That's forumcom with 2 M's.com. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. It's not nearly as exciting as it seems.